mentioned, we have Kyle Bonagura with us right now, John and Jim, San Diego Sports 760. I said earlier, Kyle, I'm like, man, this is such a detailed look. It was such a deep dive. I told Jim, my co-host, I'm like, this is like 10,000 words, but we actually just typed it into the word counter. It's like 3,600 words, but really, really good insight for Aztec fans, for college football fans. We appreciate you hopping on, Kyle. You wrote about this Pac-12 rebuild. I guess I want to start with this. What is the Pac-12 selling points? How are they selling this vision? How did they get these four Mountain West schools to come on board at this point? And thanks for hopping on.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks for having me. So I think there's a few things to that to take into account, and I think it starts with just like the Pac-12 still has some brand recognition from a marketing standpoint, right? If you are trying to make money on a conference brand, you're still going to have an easier time doing that with the Pac-12, just as far as visibility and awareness than you would with the Mountain West. And to what degree that is, like, who knows exactly, but that is that's a belief that's shared by almost everyone in the college sports industry. The second part that I think is important is that it's not just about what they can offer like as things sit with six. It's really that, like in the Mountain West, the teams at the bottom are really dragging the conference down, as you guys probably know. Like teams like San Jose State, Hawaii, Wyoming, New Mexico. There's not really much that those schools offer that is attractive on a larger scale, right? And so it's not so much about what the Pac-12 has to offer. It's like, okay, you get away from that, and then you try to add the best of what's available. And in the end, you're going to have this conference that's going to be stronger across the board. You're going to have more investment top to bottom than you do now, where, a school like San Diego State that is invested heavily is really kind of dragging some of those other schools with it. So those are two pieces. And then I think a part that I didn't really get into in my article, but I think will be important going forward is like the Pac-12 does have the infrastructure left behind from the Pac-12 network, right? So they have a studio in the Bay Area where they produce all the games for the CW, and that will be kind of a card they can play as they take their rights to market with the streamers and whoever. Then it makes it they can produce content. And there's like a lot of ways you can benefit from that. They're already taking outside contracts as a way to just generate revenue using the studio space they have available with clients outside of the college sports industry, right? So they have quite a bit to offer. It's still not a Power 5 type of deal, right? But there is certainly an infrastructure there that can be a lot more beneficial for the member schools than what the Mountain West is now and kind of was on track to be.
Kyle, how quickly is this thing going to move for them to announce their next members to join here? And what schools do you envision or think that they could add?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. It's a question that I asked a lot of people who would actually might know the answer to it, and no one was really was willing to commit to a firm timeline on that, right? And there's some things in play there. One is, they would love to have Cal and Stanford back. That's not possible as things sit. I mean, the ACC is litigating for lawsuits with Florida State and Clemson for those schools trying to get out. And so Cal and Stanford are kind of governed by the same exit parameters as those schools are. So that's not really possible. But if the ACC falls apart as a result of some of those lawsuits, maybe Cal and Stanford are in a position where, okay, this conference is actually falling apart fast. We'd like to go back to something a little bit more regional. I mean, that's the dream for the Pac-12. I mean, there will always be, I think, two seats, warm for Cal and Stanford if it ever comes to that. I think chances are pretty low for the time being. Then I think the most obvious place you look, talking about realistic candidates, is in the American, right? And schools like, I have it on good authority that the Memphis and Tulane are schools that the Pac-12 will absolutely pursue. It's really just a question of how will that interest be reciprocated. For those two schools, it's not a surefire deal like it was for the teams in the Mountain West. One, there's just the geographic issue, right? It's a lot of travel, especially when you're on kind of the fringe of a geographical footprint like that. And while that was like easy for a lot of these bigger schools to justify, moving to the Big Ten if you're in California in the Northwest, like Oregon and Washington did, and UCLA and USC, but it's a different playing field in terms of how much, how many billions of dollars were kind of in play there. In this case, the American schools get about $7 million a year annually in their media rights deal. What's the number to make it worth Memphis and Tulane's while to also join a national conference, right? If you're making $10 million a year, that maybe that's not enough of an incentive to spend so much time on the road, the added cost of travel, right? So that number would need to be higher, and I don't think right now anyone really has a great understanding of what that media rights deal will look like. Part of that is predicated on what the list of schools ends up being. And so I'm a little bit pessimistic that they're going to have as easy a time with some of those American schools to make the jump over, which, if you kind of game it out like that, you can look in Conference USA, some of the schools in Texas, schools like North Texas, Texas State, UTSA, maybe you go there. Those are possibilities. Those aren't move the needle type schools, but I think that, those are schools that will be vetted. But you start going down the line, you start running out of schools, right? And so that takes you back to the Mountain West. And I still feel like it's a no-brainer to eventually, bring UNLV in. I mean, there's a lot to like about UNLV. Infrastructure, they've invested in football. It's a great travel destination. It's easy to kind of get on board for them as a conference member. They've got history of basketball, kind of the list goes on, right? But I think it's what's in for me, that was one of the big surprises that it was 4, not 5, and UNLV wasn't a part of this kind of initial wave. And I think one way to explain that is that, okay, now that there's call them the top 4 Mountain West schools are gone. The Pac-12 has really kneecapped the Mountain West, right? So the remaining schools are in a position of weakness now. It's less, it should be a little bit easier to convince schools to leave. And I think if you start talking about a possible negotiation, I mean, look at Cal and Stanford are getting 30% per year of the ACC media rights distributions, 30% compared to their conference peers. Oregon and Washington are getting 50% in the Big Ten. So I think you're looking at a situation now is if the Pac-12 circles back with teams in the Mountain West, okay, you can offer them 75% on the dollar, right? 75 cents on the dollar compared to these original 6 schools. Because what's the alternative? I mean, if Air Force leaves for the American, which seems like the most likely option, the Mountain West is going to fall apart quickly. They're going to fall below the threshold needed to have a conference at all, and they're going to be kind of in a position of weakness as far as negotiating their terms in a new home. So I think all of those things are in play, and timeline. Your guess is as good as mine. It could be as early as a week, 2 weeks, but I think there's also potential this could drag on into 2025 when some of the media rights things and things like that are a little bit more clear.
And what do you think the number they're going to land on is for total amount of schools? And a second part of that is there any possibility? I know Oregon State AD Scott Barnes talked about only having schools with football and basketball. Why wouldn't they want to have maybe like a Gonzaga or a basketball-centric school in this conference as well?
Yeah, so I saw Scott said that. I asked a lot of people that same question, and they were not as definitive on it as he was. I think that's, he might have misspoke there, to be honest. I'm not 100% convinced that is the case. I think that's in the initial parameters that they looked at, football was important, but I think as they build this thing out, look, Gonzaga makes a lot of sense. And look, WSU and Oregon State are already in the WCC now for the next 2 years. There's going to be some, relationship building going on during that period that might make some of those moves a little bit easier to facilitate because, it's not just basketball either. I mean, not all these schools have all the same sports. So you're going to be looking at situations where you don't, you're low on numbers in other sports too, like offhand, call it swimming or tennis or whatever it might be, right? So you do need to kind of build out your membership to be able to kind of just field those other sports across the board. As far as where they end up, I think that'll be a moving target and quite frankly could change year to year. I think that's one of the things that it's really important to keep in mind with all this realignment stuff. nothing's ever final. It's really just year to year, 2 years at a time. It's in really small increments now before things will inevitably change again. And so I think, they have the minimum is 8, right? They have to get to 8 to meet the NCAA minimum. But I think, 9 makes a lot of sense for football, just so you can have the 8-team round robin. It makes non-conference scheduling a little bit easier. 10 feels like the ideal number. That way you have a travel partner for basketball and things like that. But I really do feel like, everything's on the table, and they're not going to like bring in someone who's like a net negative, like a San Jose State, just to get to a certain number. I think they'll be a little bit more strategic than that.
Kyle, we probably have 1 minute, but I wanted to ask you from this perspective. We all know it, like from the media or fan perspective, there's the power leagues, there's the group of 5, so to speak, right now, leagues. Will this, if they added Memphis and Tulane, and that's basically the league, the 6 they have, Memphis, Tulane, sure, we could argue a 9th or a 10th, but if that's the league, has that clearly emerged as like 4 out of every 5 years that winner is going to a playoff? And I guess my question is actually this: between the power and the group, could another category emerge, and could that be the Pac-12?
Yeah, I think that's the goal for the Pac-12, is to be that clear number 5 league. So most years, like however it breaks, like your conference champion, if all things are equal, right, will have a good chance to be that 5th highest ranked conference champion, get the playoff berth. It's tough, right? Because if you're a Sun Belt team and you schedule easy and all of a sudden you're undefeated, like, and you're not, and you're the Pac-12 and you're scheduling a little bit more difficult, like, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But like, not only that, I think that they truly believe that they can be in the at-large territory too. Like even if you have like an unbeaten team from another conference, your champion still has a shot to get in at-large. But I know that's Cal or WSU and Oregon State are trying to make that reality this year, even without a conference affiliation.
All right, it's going to be fascinating. Really great writing, reporting. Again, it's at ESPN.com today. Inside the Pac-12's 4-team expansion, Kyle Bonagura with about 4,000 words on it. Kyle, we appreciate it. San Diegans are interested with San Diego State, a part of this new league, so thanks for hopping on here.
Thanks, Kyle.
Sure thing. Anytime. Thanks.
All right, great stuff. Kyle Bonagura, again, with ESPN. We'll react to that, but call right